good day to all. Welcome to another session for the work-based trading. So for this particular session, we are going to discuss the trainees training requirement. For the learning objectives, we have first one is to determine the current competencies of the trainees or group of trainees. Another one is to identify trainees training requirement. So based on our previous material, we knew that the work-based training, one of the purpose is to enhance the skills of our trainees. Wherein in every training, it should be based on what was already learned and what is needed to be learned or enhanced. Whether your work-based training is in conjunction with an in-house training or a work-based training after an in-house training, you should assess the training needs of each of your trainees so that you will be able to plan the appropriate activities that will enhance their competencies. Activities that will improve the skills rather than repeating what is already learned should be the emphasis of a work-based training. So in other words, before you conduct any work-based training, you should be able to identify the training needs of your trainees, each of one of them, so that you will be able to craft a training plan that will be responsive about what they need to learn. So we avoid a training that will only serve as a repetition on what is already known or new by our trainees. Okay? So it is very important that prior to the conduct of every work-based training, we should have to gather through training needs analysis. So in order to determine the needs of our trainees, or in other words, what will be the focus of our training, we need to determine the trainees' current competency. Okay? So to be able to determine the trainees' training requirement, it is important to determine first their current competencies. So ano na ba yung nalalaman nila at this very moment? Before they enter or before you start the work-based training or even a training itself, you should first measure or determine their current competencies. This is in order to determine the training gaps. So aside from that, we also need to learn or determine what are their strengths and weaknesses. So in this matter, the trainer can determine trainee's current competency by first checking with the trainee. Okay, so this is when you meet the trainees. For example, during the first day, subject them to an oral interview. So kausapin sila. So in that way, you can be able to have some data gathering about his or her current competencies. Or you can even have simple written tests if needed. So as you notice, most of the courses or most of the trainings prior to the conduct or start of the training, they administer a pre-test. So a pre-test is also one way to determine the current knowledge and competency of a student or trainee. So if the learner is having a hard time to write or understand in English language, use a simple language that the learner may easily understand, like using a local dialect. So we have here some yung tinatawag na adjustment. Okay? In order to address the concerns of our trainees or students, allowable adjustment. Another way for us to determine the current competency of our trainees is through research. Okay, so I know you are very knowledgeable when it comes to research because you also have one of your course or subjects in this BTBTL program wherein you need to conduct research in order to determine, measure something. No? So for this, you will analyze any pre-session information available like enrollment or pre-application form and other related documents, di ba? So katulad sa atin, bago kayo mag-enroll, bago tayo mag-undergo, mag-participate or mag-attend ng training, we usually accomplish ano, forms that we supply there our basic information, personal and even educational, and even work experiences. So we can also use those documents such as reports on previous competency assessment undertaken, resume or curriculum vitae, enterprise training and assessment records, performance report from their supervisor. Because we can also encounter trainees or students in this particular type of training wherein they are already working or has already prior experiences, may it be informal or formal. Okay, so we need those documents in order to validate, and one way in order for us to determine their current knowledge and competencies. In order to identify the trainees training requirement, we're going to prepare some documents or forms, okay, as instrument in determining their training needs. So for the first one in this particular session, I'm going to introduce to you the TNA Form 1. Okay? So in the succeeding sessions, we are going to develop again some other forms in relation to this self-assessment checklist. So for this one, for the TNA Form 1, it is about the self-assessment checklist. So as you can see, using the form below, the trainer, kayo ito in the future or in this particular time, you will be the one to craft this with respect to your chosen qualifications. Okay, so you will list down all the competencies found in the competency-based curriculum, or what you have downloaded, in your case, is your training regulation or the TR of your chosen qualification. So I assume all of you already had secured your individual copies. So you will use that in the succeeding activities for this course. Number two, let the trainees answer by checking the appropriate box. Yes, if he or she can perform the task, and no, if he or she cannot perform the task. So after you list all of the competencies on this particular form or checklist, in reality, you need to administer this form, distribute it with your trainees. So if you have 25 trainees, so you let them answer this. So this is more on self-assessment or self-evaluation in order for them to measure, to determine what are their competencies already achieved. And afterwards, you will be able to gather those answers or data so that you can establish what will be the focus of your training. And also, saan tayo magsisimula, for example. So take note, in listing all the competencies in this particular form, you will notice in your training regulation that for every qualification, we have what we call basic, common, and core competencies. So you need to open your training regulation and look for the course outline or structure. So you will notice there that it is divided into three major competencies. We have basic, common, and core, and for each competencies we have what we call units of competencies, and for each units of competency there are specific learning outcomes. So lahat po yung na-mention ko from the basic, common, and core with their units of competencies as well as their specific learning outcomes, you need to specify or copy it and transfer it in this checklist. Okay? So, as you can see sa note number 2, so what I mentioned is number 1. Number 2 is learning outcomes for each should also be included. Take note of that. Okay? So, number 3, let the trainee answer the self-assessment checklist. Number 4, the trainee must be guided by the trainer while answering the form. So, in our case, since wala naman tayong actual trainees, we will just assume na kayo na rin po mismo mag-answer nyon. No? So later on, there will be a specific instruction on how are we going to accomplish the forms. Okay? So as you can see here in the table, you will list from the basic, common, core competencies, their respective unit of competencies, and their specific learning outcomes. As is po yan. So kung paano yung arrangement doon sa training regulations nyo, it should be reflected on your self-assessment checklist. So as you will notice, this is the screenshot of the website of the TESDA where we will be able to see all of the available qualifications as of this time. And like what I've said, I already sent this to you last week, ano? So I assume that all of us had already secured our own copies based on our chosen qualifications. So you will notice on the left side, this is the training regulation, okay? And on the right side is the TNA Form 1. So I just have it some arrows for you to have the guide in order to where to locate, you know, from the TR and where which part of the TNA Form 1 or the self-assessment checklist will you transfer the specifications or data coming from your TR. So you open your training regulation and look for the course structure. Okay? So the first step is you must have the copy of your own respective training regulation. Open it. Usually it is a document file and look for the course structure where you can see the basic competencies, common competencies, and core competencies. So as you will see in your screen, no, given, for example, nahanap mo niya yung course structure. So since we're going to cover each of the major competencies, units of competencies, and the learning outcomes, we usually start from the basic competencies. Okay, so as you can see in my example, my first unit of competency under the basic competency is the participate in workplace communication. So in that way, you will just copy the unit of competency, the first unit of competency, participate in workplace communication through to your TNA Form 1. Okay, and you will notice it must be reflected under the basic competency. Just like what I've said, dapat po as is. Kung paano yung arrangement dito, kung ano yung nauna, hanggang ano po yung pinakalas, yung ganyan din po ang magiging arrangement natin in your TNA forms. So participate in workplace communication. Just follow the arrow. And after copying the unit of competency, for example, the first one, you can see here in your course structure on the table, aligned with the first unit of competency, which is participate in workplace communication, refer to the learning outcomes, just copy again the specified learning outcomes. So in my case, in the participate in workplace communication, based on my TR, I have here 3 learning outcomes. So you will just copy it here. For example, obtain and convey workplace information, transfer it to your TNA Form 1 under the first unit of competency under the basic competency. And you will also copy the complete relevant work-related experience or documents and participate in workplace meeting and discussion. So as is lang po, you will just copy and paste the information coming from the TR to your TNA form. So you will just do the same procedure with the rest of the competencies. You will cover everything like what I've said, from the basic, common, and core competency, including their units of competency and their learning outcomes. So here is an example. Once you had already transferred all the information coming from your training regulation to your TNA form 1.1, which is the self-assessment check. Okay? So this is for the core competencies. So like what I've said, after you copy the information from your TR with your TNA forms 1, so since we have no actual trainees that will serve as our respondent in order to accomplish the forms, tayo na lang po mismo, yung sarili natin. So do not mind if the qualification you have chosen is not related to yours, because what is important here is the preparation of these documents. Okay? So wala pong problema yan whether you have a prior knowledge or it is related with your specialization. Wala po yan bearing dyan. So what is important here is the process that I'm introducing to you, especially for the work-based training. So after you copied all the informations coming from the basic and common core competencies, you will notice that you need to check yes or no. So for the basic and common competencies, we're just going to assume that all of those units of competency and their specific learning outcomes, you will just check yes. Okay? So ulitin ko, lahat po ng mga units of competencies and learning outcomes for the basic and common competencies, you will just check all yes. But for the core competency, please choose at least 8. Ano, kayo na po mismo pipili diyan, ano? So you will just choose 8, ano? It doesn't matter kung alin yan, kayo na po mismo, you will just check no 8 na no, and the rest checkan po ninyo ng yes. Okay? So the self-check instrument will give your trainer data that are essential in designing a training plan for you. So I repeat, once you have already accomplished or prepared the TNA Form 1, specified you already specified there the basic, common, and core competencies, just check yes, all yes for the basic and common, and for the core competency, please choose 8 competencies that you will check no and the rest with yes. Okay. So for your task sheet number 1, using your assigned competency, accomplish and prepare TNA Form 1.1 self-assessment checklist and identify at least 8 learning outcomes under the core competency with a no from the checklist. Okay, so for any clarifications or concern, kindly message it over our chat group. Okay, so thank you for listening. Good luck, and hopefully everyone got the instructions needed for you to follow in the preparation of task sheet number 1. Okay, thank you.